Melbourne, Brisbane preview time. Here to talk about the Quaddie legs in Melbourne and the features at Doomben, where we are seeing some drying conditions and, well, as close to a good track as we can get. In Brisbane, we have a very special guest, Shaun Beirne, who has a very famous name and a deep pedigree in all things racing and betting. G'day, Shaun. Of course, you've met Gordo up the top there, and tell the audience, who some of them will be familiar with you, but give us a brief run through of your, relatively illustrious, I guess, betting career.
Yeah, so I guess I grew up in the game with my uncle Dominic, my father Paul, my grandfather Keith, all bookmakers, and my other uncle Greg. He was also in the wagering game. Had one of the first totalisator.
He was the quiet achiever of the trio, wasn't he?
Pretty lethal in his day. And so I grew up understanding racing more, and then sort of pivoted a little bit more into the sports betting side of it. I guess, I came around, finished school in the early 90s, and the sports betting was just starting to take hold, around that period. So I went off down the sort of side down in the soccer. I spent most of my time sort of focusing on that, and building out, becoming a trader in the soccer. Cole Tidy gave me my first job at what was City Index at the time. Did a little bit of work on course. So I went from right through there, through the tab, was a general manager of wagering there at probably at 30 years old. Set up Luxbet, which was kind of a little bit of it was a good experience, but an interesting experience. Then I moved to Melbourne, worked with Daff at Sports Alive for a small time, Jared Daffy. So worked at Betfair, started all their fixed odds risk markets and set that up. And, a couple other places, managed services, mob called Bettier, and that was an interesting system. And then most of recent set up a company called BetM for the Japanese Mixie Group, who are now looking at potentially buying PointsBet, of course.
Yeah, I saw that.
So I liaised with them and worked with them and got that set up for them, their licensing and everything. And since then, I've just been doing my own thing. A little bit of tipping, a little bit of services there. Just to keep things ticking over. Punting, I've always punted myself right through. I've had many years where I've just punted for a living. Tinkering away with database that I'm access to, and with Dominic and doing things on there, and now preparing to start my own book and looking to get licensed to set up and have a crack myself.
All right, so you've got a deep corporate knowledge there. What do you say about the landscape these days?
Yeah, it sounds like most of the work is being the enemy, Shaun. Hey?
Yeah. So look, as I said, I've spent. I guess in the last 20 years, I've probably worked, 12 or 14 years and spent 6 or 8 years doing my own thing. So, I've plenty of time on both sides of the divide, I guess, if you want to call it. Look, I think the corporate space, it's very interesting at the moment. It's kind of broken record to say that it's overtaxed. It absolutely is. We all know that. Will the governments do anything about it? Potentially not. The Vic government just released their budget, and they were well down on their gaming or wagering revenue from the POC tax. Unfortunately, governments kind of only see one way to fix that is by potentially raising the tax.
Surely in this case, they've gone from 10 to 15 and they've had to revise their forecasts down.
Yeah, yes.
Doesn't anyone there go, well, hang on, maybe the rate is too high?
You would hope so. And look, I think it possibly is a tipping point. I think we're seeing some of the PRAs start to realise that they have over-indexed the taxation and made it very difficult. And we're starting to see some of those PRAs think a little bit more laterally about what they're doing. I wouldn't say it's, the dam's broken. I wouldn't say it's, charging ahead at a rate of knots, but we're starting to see that they are recognising the rivers of gold are gone. We're seeing a lot of, rationality or rational and reduction of staff and changing the ways of some of these PRAs. And I think they're starting to get it. The governments, look, I think they will have to sooner or later be reasonable with it. So I do think there's a potential period there of where taxation becomes a little bit more fair. The question is, I suppose, can the industry sustain itself and can the punters sustain themselves until such time as that becomes a little fairer? And, that's one of the biggest problems. It's that realistically, the bookmakers are making too much money or too much on turnover, too big a yield in respect to what the customers are losing. They have to, because, your first 6 or 7% basically goes in fixed costs, right, as a bookmaker. And then you've got your variable costs. So it's very difficult, but the problem is when bookmakers are making 15%, they're giving some back by way of generosities. They give that to very few people, and principally a lot of that comes back. But the fact is that the punters just can't sustain themselves losing at that high rate. It's the biggest problem that the punters are burning themselves out, and the only way to address that is to have a little bit more reasonability in what the markets are and how the bookmakers are treating customers. And the only real way to have that is to have some form of taxation relief.
Okay, so when you put your punter's hat on, what are you seeing at the moment, and how does it affect you as a punter?
So, look, I think it's interesting. I know there's been some talk about, percentages going up, and that's absolutely clear. It's been clear as day. I think, there's some stuff out there. Kingsley put some stuff out recently, and Daniel O'Sullivan's talked about it in the past. Without having all the facts and figures in front of me, I could have said, anecdotally that absolutely that's the case. There's reasons for that. I think as a punter, there's still plenty of opportunity. I think there's still quite an inefficient market for quite a long time in the betting. We're seeing now in the last week, we've all seen what, Tabcorp have changed their modus operandi, and I don't think it's such a bad thing. I know there's a lot of people that are against it, but, as a bookmaker, you do a time series over your profitability, and your profitability is not in the early betting, I can tell you that. So,
yeah, they're still getting cheap information in the early betting.
Yes, absolutely.
Let's just say Hong Kong, for example, you can put on one bet to win 500 in using a targeted account, and that's it. Price is gone. That's one bet to win 500. Yeah. And what happens is they all scrape off each other, so it's not like you can back it with 8 bookmakers either. You know what I mean? So one bet to win 500 can turn the market off. And have you noticed, Shaun, they're not even adjusting the percentages when they wind it in either.
Yeah, look, I think there is, when we I guess focusing on the different jurisdictions, I think, if in my playground we're talking about Australia and Hong Kong betting, is certainly a different animal in itself. Yeah. I mean, there is a way to sort of generally get at least something down with the Australian books. I think sometimes what we have to as punters is sometimes just say, okay, well, that betting that was there for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. I mean, we kind of get ourselves upset or worried about the fact that the 330 to 220, is what I don't hardly want to back it now because it was 220. And, it's kind of something that I don't tend to profess or go along with. I think, of course, I would love to get the 330 and I'd love to get the more inefficient. But, I still see, I think there after scratchings, there's still plenty of holes in the market, in my opinion. I don't have
a problem with Australia. I think there's plenty of opportunities to get on in Australia, but I'm just whinging. Yeah, so I'm finding something to whinge about.
Yeah, the overseas jurisdictions. Look, again, there's less. There's the bookmakers, whatever confidence they have in Australia, which is diminishing by the day in their markets, they have less confidence anywhere else. And I guess that just comes down to the fact again that they just have no interest in that early betting. The problem, and again, like I I dipped my toe into Hong Kong in the last couple of years, and there was nowhere that I could bet with for very long that allowed me to keep going. And so I just basically turned it back off and said, well, I'm not going to sit here on Wednesday nights and Sunday afternoons, and kill myself for when all of a sudden I can't have a bet. And then, again, and the problem is all of that then lends itself to the fact that the bookmakers need to make the revenue. I get there's no, big PRA tax on Hong Kong, even though the Hong Kong Jockey Club would love it to be. But it just goes to prove the difficulty of still trying to cope with what you can when you're under a lot of pressure, and a lot of these companies are under pressure from shareholders to keep making more and more money, and they don't see the benefit in betting bets that are bad turnover. So gone are the days where any turnover was good turnover. Poor turnover or bad turnover, they just want to run a mile from. And look, in fairness, again, sticking to the Australian markets, I mean, Mark, you're from racetracks of a day gone by. There's nothing really changed. I mean, there's bigger limits and, people had to bet people, but there was always people that, they would get bet a limit. There was always bookmakers that tried not to bet limits. There was always bookmakers that, that didn't want to partake. There was always bookmakers that want to be the first people up. And, my before my time, and, my dad used to even just an hour ago saying, I think it was Arthur Singh used to, be the first one there. He said he'd have 40 people around his board. Well, it's really no different to what's happening now with people trying to jump on and get the first of the prices. So, I don't think, like, bookmaking in essence hasn't really changed drastically. The big change is the accessibility, but also the taxation. But I mean, I know bookmakers back then, they were looking at, they might have been making 4 or 5 and 6% yields, and taxation was still a big part of it. I come back to, though, that at least then punters could enjoy and bet over a longer period with a smaller amount of money. And I think that comes back to the crux of the problem now, is that we are burning off customers at far too quick a rate. And even hobby punters, which I think that the industry hasn't focused enough on saying that this is a nice hobby or can be a good hobby, can be an interesting hobby, rather than like anything else, like people spend money however they like to spend money. People race miniature boats around lakes. My brother-in-law loves to do that. And do I want to do that? No. But people would say, oh, you're wasting your money doing that. Well, no, everyone says, oh, that's a great hobby to be doing. Well, I don't necessarily see the difference between having a hobby that brings you enjoyment, from having a bet in a controlled manner. So,
well, Shaun, I don't know
right
about you, but when I was 13 and the mates all wanted to go out to the theme parks or whatever on a Saturday, and obviously you'd get $100 off your folks to go out and go on some roller coasters or whatever, I'd say, Dad, can you give me 100 so I can go up the tab? And we'd go up together. So, it's just what you like,
Yeah, I mean, I think as an industry, I think our leaders have failed by not, by spending too much time over advertising, which I know is a pet hate of everyone, inclusive of myself, but also just with the wrong message. Just, it really needs to just be a message that we aren't the purveyors of evil. The problem being that kind of some of the bookmakers have turned these sites into quasi poker machines, and that sort of idea that poker machines you can't defend. Well, I can't. I think that's very difficult. Well, I can defend wagering, but I can't defend straight gaming. And so I think, again, that's where we're at. I think the industry needs to do a lot better with how it promotes itself.
Well, don't you think, Shaun, they've got to differentiate between wagering and poker machines? So I think we get thrown into the same group, and
absolutely.
It's definitely not the same.
Absolutely, and worse still, you get a lot of people coming out and relating us to nicotine and cigarettes, and it's just insane. No cigarette was ever good for you. I'm not saying that every bet's good for you, but there's plenty of people. There's a lot of people that can have a bet, and even on the worst scenario of the worst studies that talk about problem gambling, it's still a minority of people that end up in problem gambling places, and the fact is that the industry doesn't go hard enough in response, I think, to someone that wants to say, oh, well, it's like nicotine, or it should be barred. Advertising should be barred the same as what we did with smoking. Well, that's just complete insanity in my.
Yeah, it's been hijacked. I love the line that in the 1600s, betting was the national pastime of England, and it was almost a national pastime here, and we've lost the plot big time. Yep. All right, as a customer, what sort of form do you like to look at? What sort of races do you like to bet on? Obviously, we're going to discuss some races today that may or may not interest you, but where do you think that the meat is in Australian racing?
Well, I'm probably a little bit different to a lot of people that can eke out a living on gambling, in that I really like the media races. I really like the metro races. I really like the races that are with as much exposed form as what I can find. I seldom bet on maidens. I seldom bet on class ones. I wouldn't say I don't. I look at the races every day. I don't necessarily bet every day, but I often bet, most days, I would say. But for me, my revenue's generally around the metro racing, and that has been the way, I think, from as long as I can remember. And then the higher graded of the races, I tend to go well in the higher grade races. So they're the races that interest me. I don't sit there and try and do a lot of videos to figure out, which maiden, the ratings have got wrong. It's not, it's just not my modus operandi. I'm lucky enough to have, our own database that we maintain, and does provide, does rely on data, I guess. So the more data, the easier it is for me to not have to interrogate it. Whilst the computer can still find lightly raced winners, and often does, and runners that are, had one run, one data point, you have to sort of interrogate that. So I like to try and be presented with something that I can find and then sink my teeth into, rather than have to, pull apart piece by piece. So my computer gives me a very good starting point, basically. And so the more data that I have in there, the better it is, and the better it can model it. And so, again, I find that those higher echelon of markets are where I target. And to a lot of people, it's kind of the opposite, because they are the markets that potentially are a little bit more efficient than some of these other, small markets. And, again, I hold that true to an extent, that the SPs become highly efficient. I still think we see a lot of movement, even in the metro markets, that before they become efficient, and that can, there's a lot of big goes, a lot of big moves. There always has been. So I still think, my focus is betting. I guess after scratchings on metro racing, I'd be sort of charging in and trying to build books around what I'm doing from there. I certainly don't mind betting early into the races if I can. But of course, the other problem with betting early into the races, again, you never know when they're going up. I'd love it to be a carte blanche, everything's going up, which is again why I don't mind this idea of the tab putting them all up at 5 to 9 on the day of the meeting. At least I then know when I need to be in front of the computer, right?
For sure.
We've definitely picked the right 7 races.
Yeah, I know. I'm so pleased.
Because I'm the exact opposite, Sean. I bet into the maidens, the class ones, the early races. Form. So we've got 7.
So I mean, look, as I said, I don't discount them completely, but it's kind of like a time management thing, really. Like, I like to have something that can give me an answer, and we can price every race every day across Australia. I've dived into one at Rockhampton today, and it is a Class 5. There was another one in Rockhampton that's a Class 1 that's coming off a maiden win that, I just sort of look at it and say, well, there's a bit of a spike there in a maiden win. I don't go into interrogate it enough to say, okay, well, no, it's got some figures to back it up. So I can, but it's just kind of a time management thing for me, really.
All right. Well, as I was doing this Melbourne Quaddie in particular, I must say that I'm never going to let Glenn complain about the numbers in Sydney again, because honestly, the Melbourne numbers are a beast of their own. We've got potentially a dry track at Sandown. There is, and it's the hillside course. There is a little bit of rain forecast. What are you working off, Shaun?
Yeah, no, I think it'll be quite dry. And I'm not far from Sandown. The bomb's saying 0 to 3 tomorrow and 0 to 1 on Saturday, and so it's basically dry.
There's a bit of wind, but isn't there on Saturday?
Yeah, there could be a bit of wind, and that's always a factor. But it's very hard to predict, of course. I don't like to try and guesstimate what tracks are going to do. I obviously will take it into account. The other X factor, I think, what we have for this Saturday is that they raced on the hillside yesterday, and it was pretty firm, or very firm. And interestingly, we've got John Kanga coming out on social media and apologising broadly for the fact that the track was too firm. The
sprinklers are out, you reckon?
Well, and I think it's fantastic. Like he does seem to be doing. He's obviously, I don't know the man, I don't know anything about him, but he's obviously very active and very approachable, which mostly people leading race clubs aren't. So I'm certainly not knocking him for being out there and talking about that, but it does leave me a little concerned about. What are they going to do to now get that track? There's not going to be virtually any rain, and are they going to now put a bit of water? Well, they're obviously going to put a bit of water on it to get it back from that to the good 4 to start the day, and that's probably got me most concerned, to be honest, about this track on Saturday, because you can't be. It's difficult to be very vocal that you're apologising for producing what I thought was perfectly fine the track.
But you're a punter, of course.
Go from there. So. That's probably my biggest worry at the moment. So, as far as the wind and everything goes, look, I will take that into account. But 15 to 20 km/h winds, I think there's a little bit. Probably it needs to be much stronger than that. I think there's a little bit. People kind of react a little bit quickly to the wind.
Yeah, my line is 30, so I'm not.
Mine's 25.
Not factoring in. Okay. Is there a profile for Sandown that you like, as in, a style of horse that you go at Sandown? This is the style of horse that floats my boat.
No, not necessarily. I wouldn't say that. I think the interesting part of Sandown, particularly the hillside of the shoot starts, the 1,000-metre shoot start is quite interesting. Not that we'll be tackling any of those races, but I like packing the horses that can sit off, just behind them and get to the crown of the track there. Albeit, again on yesterday, one of the main sprint races, the horse that led bolted in, and so it's kind of the one that I profile. But look, I don't sort of, necessarily worry about horses for courses, to an obvious extent that. There are some horses that love a Flemington and don't necessarily like a Caulfield. Sandown hillside plays pretty well. It's a big, long, fair straight. It's quite undulating, but it's a track that I don't mind betting at, and I think it's a pretty fair track.
All right, well, let's kick off with the first leg of the Quaddie, which is an 1,800-metre benchmark 100. And the market at this stage says $4 or 3 to 1 Saban. Air Assault off the Adelaide form is a firmer at $5. Bold Soul with the Saban form is $8.50. Sedati, who came here for the Caulfield Cup, has had another break, but is a firmer at $8.50. We've got Aaron Bay, who's got the Air Assault form line at $8.50. $9 Macram off the 7-day backup, winning at Flemington at long odds last week. And Forgot You heads the others. The speed in the race is a touch gentle. My map says that Air Assault finds the front. Aaron Bay is handy, and of course Rolls is drawn the deepest and perhaps can be expected to roll forward. This is at the 1800, which is at the end of the back straight, so they've got the longest run to the turn. Do you say anything about that map or pace shape of this race, Shaun?
No, I agree with you. Doesn't look a race with a lot of pace, and I think Air Assault, is going most likely control it, and that's Air Assault's hope, to control the race and the pace, because it's pretty well only time it can win.
It's got a lot of, it hasn't had that many runs in Melbourne over the course of its career, but it's been around a bit. As our honoured guest, you can have first bite at this race. It doesn't look like an attractive race from Gord's point of view. Is there a position that you can take in relation to the market, or is there an opinion that you want to advance as far as this race is concerned?
Not a strong opinion. No, look, my market comes out pretty close to what the market is. I can't get Saban or Saban, named after Nick Saban, quite as short as the market, but it was pretty good. Both starts is prep. It's run on well. The query is it's going to be back again. The jockey is claiming only 2 of the 3 kilos that he can claim. Still going to have a very light weight, but the market hasn't missed it. The market's now $4, and I think that's probably a bit tight. The couple that I'm working around in the race, without being completely enthused, is Air Assault, because, as I said, it is going to control the pace. And Aaron Bay, look, I backed it myself last start. I think there was plenty on it. It firmed pretty heavily over there in Adelaide. It was left a bit of a sit and shot there for its stablemate Regal Asmon late. It just not held up a lot, but it did take a little bit of time to get its momentum up. I think it's probably the one that is about value for me, but it's not a race I'm going to sink my teeth into. The other query runner, there's a couple of ex-Italian runners in the race. Samarco, I thought, was quite an interesting second jump out. It's run last in its 2 jump outs, but its figures over in Italy and Germany are pretty good. It's something I don't know that it can be winning tomorrow off those jump outs, but the second jump out was, I wouldn't say hidden, but they weren't exactly letting the horse down much. So it'll be an interesting race. So look, for me, I'll be looking at Aaron Bay, Air Assault. I'm happy to be against Saban, but not going to be much for me.
And Bold Soul, obviously, there's a bit of a turnaround there with the favourite. Do you expect? Well, what are you expecting from it, perhaps in terms of betting?
Yeah, so I've got it. It depends which figure I give it, I suppose. It's got some PBs that are really pretty good for this. Its form out to the spell was nothing really that rated anywhere near those PBs. Its first up run was okay, and look, it was a bit slow out. It's been a bit slow out the last couple. It's going to be back, I guess, more closer to the tail of the field, and barrier 2, I think it could be back right, shuffled along the inside. I couldn't see it as a I can see it as a winning chance, but I can't see there's any value in the market, albeit it was $11 when I took the market down. I'm not sure exactly what it is now. But I'd be betting around it tomorrow, Saturday. Do I think it's got capability, and do I think it can be winning a race? Yeah, I think it's got some upside, but not in this race.
All right, over to you, Gord. I can't. I'm not expecting any type of Monty or moral from you in this race. Is there anything that took your fancy?
There won't be that, but there's only one decision I need to make, and that is, do I back number 11 Saban, or do I have the race off? And I'm going to have the race off. I don't like backing horses that are map negative with apprentices on in this price range as favourite. So saying that, it's clearly got the right setup. It's come back really well. Incredibly limited opposition. It's got a lot of ticks too. But yeah, at the 11 clearly on top, but at the moment I might be having a nap.
Yeah.
All right. Now, we'll look at the form lines in this race. I didn't get excited about, obviously. I'm not keen to try the Adelaide form. Obviously, Sean's made the case for Air Assault because of his racing style and the Angry Skies race. Well, Angry Skies won that race at 50-1. There were a number of unlucky runners. They came home slowly. Generally, you like to look for those sort of 84s into the 100 that are, you know, getting in, you know, they're generally more lightly raced, and they're obviously beating some pretty exposed horses as well. But I could entertain Forgot You, who's second up off a very, very long spell. And I'm interested to see what Sean said about the Samako, because I couldn't shake it either. But low confidence race from me. Let's move on to the seventh, which is an 84. This time it's over the mile, and Otago is tight and has tightened. It's $2.50. $7 Persian Spirit off the Warrnambool wins. $7 Road Cone is a firmer, but not even close to getting a run yet. Ruakaka Raider second up is $12 and heads the others along with the Shaper at $13. The speed looks to be from the middle to wide draws. Reset the Jazz is perhaps the leader. Nation's Call has speed. New York Hurricane has speed. And from the deepest, Chartres may be well persuaded forward. Again, a decent run to the first turn. Sean, what sort of pace shape are you expecting here?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I thought Chartres probably cross and lead. Road Cone, if it gets a run, it led last start, which was a little bit against its normal, settling just off pace. So I'd expect they'll roll forward again. It was pretty impressive last start. Reset the Jazz, the Fortune Teller even at big price might get up there. But I don't think it'll be a strong pace, particularly as you say, there's a fair run down the back straight. I don't think they'll be getting along. And so I think there's some advantage to being not far off that pace anyway.
All right. What's your assessment of this?
The assessment of this race, and you touched on Otago, and it's been sort of 330 into 240. And I think that's probably fair that the 340 went off. When I originally looked at it, I said, well, it's not necessarily for me, but as he may be back, and he's got barrier one. However, I think they'll probably be more forward than where my initial thoughts of the map were. It has settled closer and won when it was at its second career start in weaker grade than this, in fairness. But the last two it's settled back. I think they'll have to take advantage of the barrier here and push forward. My issue with the race now is that I've got Road Cone as the second favourite, and if it gets into the race, it will get a lovely run. And Persian Spirit, this is a pretty tough test for it, but it's never missed a place. Its last start win at Warrnambool was very good. It was a really great ride that day and took advantage of the situation and the circumstances and the conditions. So those two down there, if they get in the field, are going to make me look at Otago and say, oh, do I want to take 225, 240 now Otago? I understand you don't lose anything from a price, but then I'm going to look at that and say, oh, well, actually I've got Otago 320 with those in the field and kind of 225 without them in the field. So at the moment, it's a no bet race to me. The only other one, assuming those two that don't get into the race, because they are still third and fourth, emergency, is Ocean Beyond. Now it's up to its 13th start, is PREV, but it's been going pretty well. last start.
What is the key to this? I mean, I actually saw this at Warrnambool because I was down there, and it looked in an unsuitable race on that occasion. But it's got some good-looking lines, and yet it's been bobbing around in all sorts.
Yeah, well, she doesn't miss sending it around, that's for sure, which is, fair enough. I thought it was unlucky. Well, it was unlucky the other day. It was held up. Warrnambool was slow out. I think ran on pretty well. Its ratings last start I've got as pretty much a PB or around about a PB, which is pretty good training effort, really, when you're talking about being 12th up into the spell. So there's no real reason that it necessarily is going to drop away immediately. So it's the one that I think has some value in it. But that said, I think, as I just said, I've got a Targo 5-4, which it is. And so I wouldn't necessarily want to be betting against it either. And it's kind of a no-bet race for me. If I could have taken the 330 initially a Targo, I'd have been happy with that. But again, then I'm going to have my two emergencies come in and they're going to be there. So this is a race where I'll certainly be staying out at this stage. But of those, I just think a Targo is going to be probably too strong and too much scope for these horses.
All right, Gord, a lightly raced horse that is second up with the King Zephyr line in this race. Is that of interest to you?
I'm going to get itchy fingers about this one. In the previous race, I probably won't, but I like backing horses like a Targo. I understand people are going to create that narrative, like with the massive spell after such a serious injury. You can do some nice stuff fresh and you can drop off second up. There's some people that hold that train of thought. I don't really follow that. I just sort of go about what you did in your sectionals late there to determine whether you're back or not. I would prefer it not drawing one, and I would have preferred King Zephyr to have done a little bit more last week to maybe frank that form a little bit more.
It was down the straight.
I know. It's just such a strange beast, that damn Flemington straight racing, isn't it? Jesus. I'm probably going to end up backing it because I can't help myself. But yet again, it's not all ticks,
No.
Does it? At least it's got the right melon on it anyway. It's got B, not J. That makes me happy.
All right. I must say that Road Cone did float my boat here. We've already spoken about the fact that he's still 3 scratchings away from getting in the race, but just seemed like a horse that was seasoned enough, 4th up here. Jumped to the lead, obviously in a much weaker race, but put a hole in his opposition and seemed like a potentially progressive horse. And Persian Spirit, I was impressed with the way that it found its way through there last start. Again, a 4-year-old that has a sense of timing about him.
I think just because you were at Warrnambool, Mark, there's this bias.
Well, obviously that you've got to bear that in mind. That when you watch videos, unless you watch all the videos, if you are ever tempted to go and watch an out wide video, you can make too much of it and fail to get the right context. Yeah. But Road Cone was a horse that I'm sweating on getting into this race. Let's go to the penultimate, which is it does have a Sydney horse involved. And this is a benchmark 100 over 1400. And LEU, away from Moonee Valley and away from wet tracks, is out to 1400 here, $3.50 in favourite. Accredited second up off the Gosford pace setter is $4.60 in a firmer. The Open is $8.50. Verdad, who was scratched last week and back in distance here, is $8.50. Red Galaxy's 11 and Oscar's Fortune is 13. And Dashing didn't lead at the 1200 last time, but out to 1400 may be part of the fray. Magnus Spin has the blinkers back on. He's down in 1. We've got LEU, which is a forward-running horse out wider, and Oscar's Fortune may be the one to try and cross and lead from the outside draw. So, Shaun, does that suggest that it'll be at least keen early?
Yeah, I think so in this race. This is, I can see Run Harry Run and Accredited being up there about there in a pace, up and around the pace as well. I'm not saying that Accredited will be wanting to lead, but I've got Oscar's Fortune coming across to lead, and then I've got kind of a bunch of them in around
jostling
around there. So yes, I do think that there will be a reasonable amount of pace in this race.
And does that inform your assessment of this race, or is there some other key to it?
Well, I'm happy to bet around LOU in this race. The 2 wins have been really good. It was a savage bias in its favour 2 ago at the Valley, and then pretty much got everything in its favour again at the Valley, and really well backed both of those. Really well back last start, and it started odds on. The previous start it wasn't. My concern with it is that it's reached a figure, at least on my ratings, that they were up there with its PBs. It just hasn't found anything more than that, and the way the numbers that I'm working off suggest that if it was going to have as easy a time as it has in those last 2, it could have rated a bit higher. Now, my expectation is that it needs to rate higher than that race again to be justifying its price now. And I'm just wondering if it's reached a bit of a ceiling in its ratings, or it has got that another couple of lengths in it to advance again. And I'm just betting against it at the price. I don't think it's necessarily got that advancement in it this run. I'm probably more of the fact that it might have reached a ceiling and might have. And I'm probably swayed by the fact that it's just had everything go right for it in the previous 2 runs, and I don't see that tomorrow. On Saturday, sorry. It still may get a lovely run. I still think it could map okay, but it's not a given as opposed to what it's had in front of it at the Valley the last 2. So I'm happy to work around it. It's still a pretty open field thereafter. The 2 that I'm most interested in, Accredited, was laying out to the spell, and possibly slightly X-class in that race, in the Group 3 race at Rose Hill. Came back and I thought it was pretty good and rated well enough. First up in the takeover target, I thought it hit the line like it was certainly wanting the 1,400 metres. And so I think his peak ratings can win here, and I think even just below that can win here and justify his price anyway. Well, says to me the price is reasonable value. So here's my main bet for the race. And the other one is Verdad. Now, I'm not sure why it was scratched last week, but it probably potentially because of the bit of the weather.
Yeah. Well, his form guide does read, nothing on the 7.5, and then winning, and then nothing again on the 7.5. And
correct. Yeah. No, it is an absolute firm tracker. So, assuming that that's what we're going to be handed up, which we can only play off that. You're right. It's sort of classic peak and trough right in the last few starts, where it's just gone no good when it's not had to condition its favour and then done very well. It did have that run of 5 or 6 seconds in a row prior to this little couple of wins now in the last 4. So again, I think certainly the prices that I took down, 850 and 480. I thought you could just about back both of those. So I'm just looking now at $5 and $8.50 best price. So I would have thought those 2. There's a couple of other chances, but they're the main 2. So I'm probably thinking the right melon wins and the wrong melon runs second. But on the J melon bandwagon here, from the B melon bandwagon. But if they're hitting the line together, I'd be pretty happy.
He does add some spice to the race, Gord, Accredited. How are you positioned here?
He doesn't just add spice. He adds just easy bet. This horse, they're dodging the weather up here, going down there, found the exact right race. I never back horses like LAU. PRs at Moonee Valley just don't equate to other tracks in Saturday Metropolitan Racing. And I didn't see enough, in those other runs recently that had it anywhere near accredited. I love the options from barrier 11 here with just not that one little bit of pace on the inside of you. It's just such an easy ride for her. As long as she doesn't do something silly like tag, if she does what Shaun says and is map positive, $5 to find out about a horse like this is just a super easy bet. Some of the stuff it's done in its career, it'd own these, and I think it gets the config to do it here. And let's hope they don't get the sprinkles out for this one either. So.
Yeah.
Gord, you mentioned C&E last week, which of course didn't run around. Does she fit into this race at all or not?
I was just that much in love with the other one that it got kicked out of bed.
The Winds of Song, yeah.
Yeah. Saying that, I could have a jar bet on it if it gets to 20s or something like that. Just at stage of prep options from 5. And I thought there was a little bit of merit in that run at Morphettville. So, yeah, it could be a jar bet.
All right. I've been relatively kind to LEU to market 5-2 and accredited 7-2. I couldn't get rid of Dashing, and certainly the dad stays in and C&E doesn't. Let's move on to the 9th. Yes, the 9th. It's the nightcap, which is... It's benchmark 84 again, this time over 1,400. So the last 2 races are over 1,400. And the market here starts with O2 Good at $4.20. Sunshine in My Pocket at $6. Hughes out of the same race is a firmer at $6. Step Aside, down from Sydney, is $6. Molly Knickers is $8. And that's pretty much it. It's 20s and longer the rest. There are, a lot to go forward here. The one that sticks out is Bigolino, which is nowhere near a run again, being third emergency. It's out in 17. It's got Red Phantom outside it. We've got Aaron T and O2 Good in the middle. And down close to the inside, a few resumers, Military Expert, Sassy Boom and Amberite. So there does appear to be a number of horses that want to go forward. Shaun, any opinion on the likely map or the likely pace in this race?
Yeah, and I think you've picked there Bigolino and Red Phantom. I expect both of them to go forward if they make the field. The obviously big query that they do. Ulysses still doesn't have a jockey, didn't when last I checked. So,
yep.
You question about whether it's going to come out, but that still doesn't get those in. Look, the pace should be pretty good. And should those horses go in, well, of course, it depends which ones come out. But either way, I think the pace here should be reasonably genuine.
And is this a betting race or not?
Yeah, look, there's two ways of thinking, I think, in this race. You've got Hughes, Molly Knickers and Sunshine in My Pocket all came from the same last start where they raced each other. I'm not sure if that's the right form for this race. I have all them in the betting. I mean, I kind of, by default, they kind of have to. It was an interesting race, and they were in the 3 wide train, the 3 of them, and Hughes led Molly Knickers and Sunshine in My Pocket was on Molly Knickers' back, and literally were the 3 runners that came around that train.
It was a cycling race.
100%. And it really was like that because you had Hughes, come lead them into it. It dropped off and got beat 2.1 lengths. You had Molly Knickers peel off his back and go forward, and then you had and Sunshine in My Pocket peel off her back and ended up beating her by a nose, 0.1 of a length. It was very favourable for Molly Knickers and Sunshine in My Pocket that day. And Hughes did all the donkey work for them. They just got everything put on a platter for them and really had to beat Hughes the way the race was run. Now, Sunshine in My Pocket now goes up 2.5 kilos and meets them 2.5 kilos worse for 2.5 kilos worse for the exercise. That run there for Sunshine in My Pocket was a pretty clear PB on my ratings. Now, it's only had 8 starts, so that doesn't mean that it was a spike that it won't be able to repeat, but it certainly had everything given to it to run that PB. Yep. I have it in my betting, but I'm happy to probably bet around the three of them here. If I had to go back to one, I'd probably go back to Hughes because he's at his fourth start for Gavin Bedgegood, and those four starts are pretty much up with its career, well, the last three anyway, pretty much up with its career peaks from its kind of very early runs. And so it's still got some scope for Bedgegood to get it to improve, which he absolutely does with horses. So, but I guess I'm happy to go away from them. Step Aside comes down from Sydney, really good, its last two. I think the price is pretty cramped on the ratings it's put up, but I'm pretty cognizant of the fact that both its last two starts, it's been held up and got that sort of split late and really burst with that energy that it, the horses, when they are held up, how quick they can accelerate, with that energy in them. So I'm probably slightly against Step Aside off its ratings base, but it's got huge upside. So it's got that opportunity. The one that
championship ownership group as well, too, Sean. Champion owners.
Our guest from last week, Sean, is actually in the ownership of Step Aside.
Okay, right. Yeah. So, I'm pretty scared of Step Aside, but I just can't get it to that number. If I do improve it and give it a little bit more of those last two wins, I get it up to that sort of the market price, but I just can't quite do that, and I'm kind of loath to start guesswork about how much more to give horses. Tend to just let the ratings speak.
I think it's fully exposed Step Aside.
Yeah.
I think,
so for me, I come back to the favourite in O2 Good, and I had a good bet on it first up. It had trialled really well, and its ratings last time in were that of a horse that had plenty of scope. I nearly passed out or, threw up, or however you want to term it, when all of a sudden they went from barrier 13, decided to hook it and go back to last, without that I saw any instruction that it had after it had settled down last, prep first, second, third, fourth.
Yeah, it's a forward-running horse, isn't it?
It's a forward-running horse. So I'm probably a little bit jaded by the fact that they did that. I'm assuming that they don't do that again, because I can see it getting across pretty comfortably here. We did talk about there is some pace in and under it, but I think it can get across and get a really nice run. I think it's got the biggest scope in the race. It ran on really well and ran on in good sectionals first up against its normal pattern, which said to me that, the horse is going well. I think it's got the biggest upside, and it's the one that I want to bet in the race, and I think is a reasonably good bet for me.
Yeah, that's where I landed. Gord, the favourite, or did you go elsewhere?
I'd say this is probably, of the four we've done, the easiest, most comfortable bet, and it's number 7, O2 Good. So I think we're all sort of on the same train here. I'm obsessed with horses when they trial well and they resume with a wide barrier and they're map positive horses and the connections decide to do stupid shit and tag them. I just want to, I don't get upset. I mean, if you'd backed it, you'd be upset, Sean. I understand that. But like, from me, a run like that, for me to back a horse like that next start gets me excited. Because they're far less likely to do it now it's got the run under its belt, because how they get paranoid about fitness and all that kind of crap. They won't do it here. It'll be map positive. You got, as Sean said, is it just over 40% of the market coming out of a form line that could be wrong, out of the Hughes and the whatever race there.
Yep.
This is just a super easy bet. I don't know. I was level on the jockey, Sean. Did you have I treated Jai McNeil and Ben Allen the same. If I could have found a way to be slightly positive there, I'd have this thing even shorter. But anyway.
So our jockey ratings, just having a quick squeeze, probably have Jai a little bit in front of Ben Allen, but I don't think Ben Allen's incapable by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, I've got him. I've got Ben Allen, his last 60 rides, striking at 20% and
Yeah,
25% pot. So he seems to be running hot
in
at the
form.
moment.
Yeah,
All right. Well, that's there's a bit of consensus there. The horse that I did that was the edge for me was I didn't find Molly Nickers. I mean, she ran that race when she was suited at relatively long odds. She's been banging around for a while, and I saw her as being too short in this market.
yeah.
Let's get over to Brisbane, which I must say well, firstly, I'm expecting a relatively benign Doomben at rail 2 metres. Weather's been fine enough this week. In fact, they chucked some water on it yesterday. So it'll be a little better than the corresponding meeting last year. Shaun, before we tackle race 7, is there a Doomben profile that you like to look for?
Well, Doomben's very much rail related, I suppose. I think, from betting there, generally, if they race a lot of midweek meetings there and the rail gets out, and it certainly is one that you want to be closer to. Although recently it's probably evened out a little bit more than what it traditionally has done. Where these races where it's back to the true now, I don't have too much of an issue with horses handling it. Again, it's not the biggest, longest straight in the world. You don't necessarily want your horse to be trying to make ground around that turn. It's always difficult for, that's why a lot of horses, backmarkers and horses with strong acceleration don't necessarily like the shorter straights, because it's just harder to make you run whilst you're going turning as well. So that would be, kind of leaning towards those horses that are kind of a bit more on pace. Although I'm probably going to go completely against myself as soon as we talk about the next race.
Well, it's the eternal conundrum, isn't it? I mean,
correct. So, but again, I sort of commented on last, about Sandown. I try not to get too fixated on the horses for courses and so on. I try to just look at every race in and of itself, because every race is a different race shape, a different map, a different expectation, the course, the rail. I try not to get too obsessed with that, but in general sense, you don't want to be last and trying to get down the middle of the track on a fair track at Doomben.
Okay, so 2,000 metres is it's the distance of the feature, but it's also the distance of the Roses, which precedes the feature, Doomben Cup. And this could have been the Oaks. It seems a better standard race than some of these Oaks lead-ups in the past. Benegill off the Australasian Oaks in South Australia is $3.25 or 9 to 4 in the old, and firm. Filia, who steps out to the 2,000 for the first time, is $4.80 and firm. Polymnia gets B Shin and had a checkered passage in the race that Benegill won. She's $6. We're out to Verona Rose off the ATC Oaks at $10. Moving out at 15. Churchill's Choice at 15. The speed is moderate. There are a lot of backmarking fillies in this race. So we've got the Bjorn horse stepping out to 2,000, Dame Commander down in 2. And Filia, who has been well and truly on pace in her mile, wins at Eagle Farm, out in 10. Canny Queen outside Filia, and down underneath them, I'd expect Bella Montana to be ridden positively. She's only had one run for Gay, and I certainly fancy that she'll be prominent. But other than that, it seems, well, Shaun, I'll say it seems a different style of race, despite the size of the field, than the Australasian Oaks that Benegill won, which was sort of a field inversion.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think it's interesting. I can see some scenarios where the pace does pick up here and be kind of on it. And you hit the nail on the head with Bella Montana likely being closer, Dame Commander potentially from the inside being there, Filia. Filia does roll along. It's not like she goes slow, but ridden well, the horses up the front of the race have certainly got an advantage here, I think.
And are you with the front brigade, or are you?
Well, it's a race that I am looking at and saying this is kind of a probable no bet race for me. my market comes out pretty close to where they are. I do have Benadryl on top and think it's really, again, a very progressive horse. She can win another big race, be it this or later. Got plenty to go right in that Australasian Oaks. Like, it was a very fast pace and sat off. And, we can see a lot of horses over Morphettville features over the years that can get to the outside of the middle of the track and run on and win races, and it often suits that. I'm still pretty taken in the second that it ran in the Vinery Stud to Treasure the Moment, the race prior. So I think Benadryl's not that far off, the real top echelon there. And granted, it was on a wet track and Treasure the Moment's wheels were spinning a bit that day, but I think it's clearly the favourite, but it will be settled last or near last. And Philia is the local hope. She's won 3 on end. She's doing absolutely nothing wrong, and she's going to be up there rolling along. She does now have to step from the mile to the 2,000 and likely lead the race, which is in all ways one thing that I kind of do have some concern with leaders going up in distance. But, pretty good trainer and obviously, for a jockey that can pace races, reasonably well. So for me, the big conundrum here is, do I want to be with the horse on pace or the horse that's going to be settled last? I guess my out here and my weak way out is to say, well, it's race 7. We're going to have an idea about how the track's playing by then. And I think that's going to be a huge thing. So for me right now, I couldn't bet into this race. Because if there is some form of track bias, it's going to make a huge difference to this market.
All right, Gord, you know these horses pretty well. They're 3-year-old fillies, so still relatively lightly raced, despite the fact that it's a staying race, not your cup of tea. Do you want to thrust yourself out?
Yeah, of course. Just interestingly, that, as you mentioned, Mark, there was a complete inversion of the field at Morphettville. All 3 in this race, Bengali moving out and Polymania, were off pace, and all the horses on speed completely dropped off, and all the ones at the back came home over the top of them. So I couldn't give, as stylish as it was, Bengali's Benagil.
Yeah.
Benagil's win was. I've decided to completely ignore it because it wasn't against bias, and there were some other horses in similar map positions that did similar things to it. Yeah. Saying that, it was stylish and dominant. So I was really hoping I'd see nothing else in its form so I could be totally against it, taking up 30% of the market. And all I had to do was go one start before that market, Rosehill against Treasure of the Moment. And for me, that's how you get this horse super short, because that's the real deal, that stuff. And none of these others have anywhere near that kind of run. So, guys, I'm going to completely ignore what everybody's saying is a really stylish win at Morphettville. I'm going to say it means nothing and just go off the Rosehill run. But yet again, map negative horses, don't know where it's going to map. I wouldn't be getting involved now, so I'm similar to Shaun. I could get itchy fingers, but I tend not to get itchy fingers over 2,000 metres because that's not my forte. It sounds like it's Mark and Shaun's forte. There is an easy bet here because I know it's going to be in one of 2 map positions, and it's number 12, Dame Commander. A lot of people are going to mark it down for that Warwick Farm run because it was a fancy day and it was on the fence and got a little bit of a PR, but I just love the setup. I love third up, 14, 16, 2,000. It's either going to lead or be behind lead, which could be advantageous. We're getting 20-1 to find out. And I have a couple of little runs, the 2 runs before it went for a spell last preparation. There's just enough in those to say that with favours, it'll be competitive around this 20-1 range. So I'm 1 Bengal from 12 Dame Commander. At the moment, the only one I'm sure I'm going to back is number 12.
I'm a little bit more grey. Of course, Benagil got her Group 1 last start. I presume that she's here for the Oaks, which will be a Group 1 in in a couple of weeks, is there likely to be any less intent? I'll go to Shaun. What do you sort of factor that particular nuance in?
To some extent, yeah, of course, because there's every chance that after the travel, they'd be a little bit touched lighter on her, leading into this race, and then start again, but focused on the Oaks in a couple of weeks. We see that time and again with horses, tend to be able to rate down a little bit the race before their grand final, and then launch again into that grand final. The only thing with her is that I just think she's just pretty capable. That travel will also keep her up to the mark, and they won't have to do a lot with her. And I think that fitness, will have her there. But she has gone Caulfield, Rosehill, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, now Brisbane. So there is probably a point where you say, well, where is she going to end it? Because she's going to have to.
Yeah, well, there is a grand final coming up, I guess.
Yeah.
So in this race, I likewise found a 20-1 chance, but I found Bella Montana, who has just had the one run for Gay. Obviously, there was nothing in that field. It was at Kembla on a Saturday in a maiden, but this horse has some lines through, well, real class, which we saw in the autumn. Not that necessarily delivered as far as the form line is concerned, but I'd expect this horse to be potent in this race. I've marked Benegill 7-2. I've marked Filia 7-2, and Polymnia with Shin On did interest me at 5-1. All right, that's the 3-year-old fillies race. The main event is a cracking race. $3.50 Antino heads the market. $4.20 Pride of Jenny. $8.50 Faulkner Park, who was in this race last year. $10 Elias. $10 Kovalika and Firm. $10 Lindemann and Firm. And then you're out to $17 Militarised. This race looks a lot better than last year, which Boy d'Argent, who is in this race this year, fought out with Faulkner Park and Wetter and Co. The map here, well, we have a leader. It's in gate 1. It's Pride of Jenny. Boy d'Argent looks to do the chasing. Lindemann will be adjacent. And I'd say that they won't give their gate away on my Oberon, who raced in the King Charles fourth in the run. Elias, of course, has drawn the deepest, and they'll have to decide whether to go forward and make a race of it. Did you have an opinion on that, Shaun?
No, look, I think it's kind of obvious here where we all know these horses. We know where they'll be, and we know they'll be chasing her. And depending on how far she wants to go, dictates the map, or dictates whenever Newitt decides to really ramp it up.
And as far as the assessment of the race is concerned, what are you looking at?
Well, I've got her wrong a couple of times lately, with her mixing of form so much. I'm probably not on my Pat Malone there, but it's very hard now to figure out which one's going to turn up. The 2,000 metres is a question to some extent. I know she's had some good ratings at 2,000 metres. One of those that crazy race in Sydney and the Queen Elizabeth, and
she is essentially a miler. I think that.
I think so. I think particularly now. I think essentially, yeah, you're right. She's a miler. So I guess, like, I can't get her as short as a market. I guess is my starting point. I can't see any value in the price. However, as I said, she's just become such a kind of very difficult horse to put a number to, because she's just throwing in good ones and bad ones. I was against her last start, so I don't want to bet her. But I'm looking at the rest of the field. Antino is a reasonably clear favourite. Antino has 2 big ratings, or 3 of its peaks. 2 of those peaks, obviously the Hindale last start and the Toorak, were just incredible rides by Blake Shin, where he's taken off and zipped around a field that was slowing, and he's not going to get that opportunity here. He's going to have to come from last or from back and run them run them down sort of, I suppose, in a traditional way. He's not going to be able to take off, and circle the field early. Lindemann, was there an excuse last start? They said it was, obviously very wet. Pulled up coughing. Did it cop something from the kickback? Was pretty well backed before pre-race there. Faulkner Bark's about where I'd expect it to be in the market. Does it have much upside left in this prep? I'm not sure, but won this race last year. Well, I think it was this race last year, but
I think it placed in this race and then went on to win that QE2.
Sorry, yes, that's right. So look, whilst I want to be against Jenny, I honestly can't sort of find too much to sink my teeth into. Even Boys Argent, probably a lot of pressure, was inside a line of 3 there last start. Can improve. My Oberon, it's not impossible Kovalika or Elias, jump out of the ground. So I don't want to bet Pride of Jenny. She's not one to be sitting there obviously laying necessarily at sort of $465 either. So for me, this is unfortunately for the viewers, but I guess we're here to try and win money.
Well,
this is a race I'd prefer to stay out of.
You've got to paint the picture, and the picture you painted is great.
is potentially Lindemann, but it's a bit of a stretch for me to say that. So I'd be staying out of this.
Gord, what are you going to do here?
I had a funny story about that. So, guys out there, Glenn does our Mounting Yard Mail, and he sent out that he wasn't betting because he had no edge, and we got some complaints about it.
Yeah.
And he was upset about it, and I told him it's one of the best messages I've ever heard. That is just so intelligent. You know what I mean? To let people know you don't have to bet if you don't think you've got an edge. Like, that's so important. And we got some flack, didn't we, Mark?
He's so sensitive. Honestly, that if it is a no bet race, it's a no bet race. Correct. I mean, you don't have to bet in every race. Gord, are you going to bet in this race?
I am. I'm going to have just a low confidence race. I think Sean's pretty much covered. I've got similar thought process with Pride of Jenny. Sean, I've only backed it once this preparation. It was when it got beaten when it came 9th by 15 lengths. That's the time I backed it this prep. So, does she show up? Valid point, and this is 2000 as well, which maybe is a question mark for her now. Look, anyway, so there's enough negatives there to not take a short price about her. Antino, it's completely irrelevant. That Gold Coast track was just playing so weird. It was wet as well. It's not going to be wet on Saturday. I'd rather, if I was taking a horse out of that Gold Coast, go off SPs and previous form than whatever it did in that Gold Coast run. And that's why I'm actually going to have something on number 2, Lindemann. It's just so consistent against an absolute freak in Via Sistina, this preparation. As I've mentioned, you can ignore that Gold Coast run. It's completely irrelevant. And I just love the map. Nash stalking, as long as I think Pride of Jenny won't go like the Clappers because they are worried about the 2000. So Nash will just stalk on Lindemann, and hopefully none of the others have a good day and can get past them. But $12 to find out when I know where the horse is going to map and I know it's running really consistently this preparation is a lot more comfortable than taking short odds about the first or second favourite, who I think are inconsistent types.
Okay, well, Antino, he set himself up with that Toorak run, and then obviously the stakes race subsequent to that with Mr. Brightside ended up in Hong Kong. He is clear favourite with me, and I have Mark Lindemann equal second pick with Pride of Jenny. I think that this is the right race for Lindemann, if there ever is such a thing.
Yeah.
The other horse that I would consider in this race is my Oberon, who is just one of those lurkers with Jay Collett that gets some sort of soft run and can overachieve in this race. So summing all that up, Sean, it sounds like you're keener to bet at Sandown, which is your local, obviously. So was there one of those Sandown races that you were keenest on of all of them?
No, look, just flicking back to them now. Probably the last. Probably most happy to back 0 2 Good of those Melbourne races.
And
others.
I've actually jumped in too early because, of course, I've left a race at
Yeah,
Doomben to do.
I thought because we'd gone a bit overtime,
Oh
you
no,
might
that's
have
what
been.
I was thinking. I got to run. So
I thought you might have been cutting me back because I've been
No.
talking too much.
Well, it's all right. We'll brush through the last race, which sees War Machine at $3.90. This is the, in fact, I think we have the winner of this race in this race again last year. War Machine is $3.90. Rise at Dawn is $8. Coleman $9.50. I Know a Star, who's first up, is $10. And then out to Freedom Rally at 13, and Transatlantic back off the Rockhampton race is $14. The map here has, it has I Know a Star, who does like to lead, and Attractable, who's been revved up with 3 trials off a long spell. But throw in Walado and Rise at Dawn out beyond Attractable. Yellow Brick is the one of the middle runners that perhaps shows the most speed, but not clearly. This looks, the leaders are fairly cut and dried in the sense that we know which horses like to lead in this race. We've got Rock Ribbed out in 19 as well that needs to try and get across. This looks fairly keen, Shaun.
Yeah, very hot, I thought, this race. And I'll keep this one pretty brief because I think War Machine's a good bet in this race. 2 ago, just should have walked in at Mornington. Atoned for that, winning, nice win there at Caulfield. Did it pretty comfortably. Gets into this race off barrier 6 with Blake. Shin on board, I think will settle, just forward of midfield or midfield. And the race really looks set up for it. If you are suggesting of which of the 7 that we're going to go through today, certainly O2 Good is a good bet, but I think this would be my best bet of these 7 individual particular races. I have some respect for Matcha Latte. With, again, probably a reasonable position in the map, and back to the 1350, I think, is more suitable. A few other chances. Rock Ribb's a chance. Coleman is in the betting. I don't want to be on Coleman. I just don't think it has the ratings and no form to get there, but, has some capability. And Rise of Dawn, I really like the horse, but don't think this race shape suits it.
What's his target, I wonder? Because obviously he's been freshened up off running the All-Star Mile and then the Doncaster.
Yeah.
I can't think of an obvious race for him.
No, I'm not sure either. But 7 weeks for me, he has raced well off 28 days. He went into the Doncaster off 28 days. So, and there's one off 56 days going back at Flemington as a 3-year-old. But I just think the race shape here doesn't suit it, and the price is no value to find out. So, yeah, for me, I said short and sweet, but yeah, I really like War Machine here. I mean, it's kind of the obvious, but it'll be a good bet for me.
It's interesting you mentioned that you don't want to be with Coleman. Of course, 3-year-olds have, seemingly struggled this season against the older horses, and J-Mac has been engaged to try and persuade the best out of him. Gord, are you going to play up your winnings here on War Machine? You were mad keen on it last time.
I'm glad that I'm already going to be winning by this stage of the day, Mark. That's the confidence I like to hear.
I'm thinking specifically of your War Machine winnings from last time.
Oh, okay, yeah. It was a good result last start, of course. Saying that, I'm a little bit concerned. Is there going to be crackerjack pace or not? Because I have found an on-pace horse that I want to have something on, but I'm worried about them just going mad up front. It's number 5, Rise at Dawn. I just love map positive horses back in grade. It's a nice, simple little variable. It's coming out off some couple of superstar races, isn't it? The last 2. So lovely trial, mid-prep trial, $8 to find out. That seems really comfortable for me. Number 5, Rise at Dawn. Saying that, I was waxing lyrical about how much ability I felt War Machine had, and I don't know, maybe it was due to my expectation more than anything, but kind of would have liked it to be a little bit more dominant last start, or maybe I'm just trying to, Or cold water on or something like that.
J-Mott's been riding well, but B Shin would appear to be just
perfect.
for
And
this
with
horse.
the pace that's going to be on and where this horse is going to map, it all looks right. And then what about the run at Mornington? Like the instructor comes out and wins the listed or group race or whatever at Scone to frank that form line, and we know what Hedge is. Hedge is like ice rich, Mark. You know, it's a barometer where you can.
It's a talented horse that struggles to win.
So look, I'm War Machine from Rise at Dawn, but at the moment I'm just a little bit more comfortable about having something on Rise of Dawn. Worst position I'll be in is break even on War Machine, but it'll probably be a winner too.
All right. I didn't quite get through that race, but I liked the look of War Machine, and I couldn't shake Rise of Dawn from a price perspective. That's a long look at the last 4 from Sandown and the last 3 from Brisbane, Doomben, that is. Shaun, I've seen you prominent lately on Betfair. You can follow Shaun on Betfair through the app and get notifications as to when you're doing something there. Where else can we find you these days?
Yeah, so I'm doing a little service with Champion Bets. I'm looking at potentially launching another one myself. Probably in the new year, doing something in the lead up to trying to build up to the making launch later in the year. But yeah, you can find my data at Champion Bets at the moment.
All right, so look out for that. There's a man with a wealth of knowledge about the wagering side of things, from the position of a punter, it's you're a pretty useful asset to the racing game. And I'd like to thank you for giving your time to us this week to discuss some sort of ho-hum but interesting races this weekend. So thanks again, Shaun.
No
we might have you on again sometime. And
next time I'll keep it a bit more succinct because Gordo's got to get somewhere.
Yeah, well, it's just a liquid lunch with me, so it's not a big deal.
Well, I didn't want to presume that, but I was about to say I think Gordo's got to get to lunch. But there you go.
Yeah.
He's always got to get to lunch. Anyway, for those of you who are members, which you should be a member, you get to see Gordo, myself, and Glenn talk about 10 races at Randwick tomorrow, where it continues to rain. The rail's out 10. It'll be an interesting card to evaluate. Will you be betting in Sydney on Saturday, Shaun?
I won't be betting early in Sydney on Saturday, that's for sure.
Yeah, all right. There's 43 emergencies, so that's half the puzzle.
Yeah, it certainly won't be worrying about trying to figure all that out before the scratchings. Literally won't look, to be honest, until after the scratchings, and then really then be a race by race view of any bias. I mean, because it's just going to be, it just could be, it's going to be bottomless, I would imagine.
Yeah. All right, the track's going to be very wet, but you'll still see the three of us, as in Glenn, Gordon, myself, tomorrow. Thanks for watching this preview, and thanks again, Shaun, for giving us all your time. We'll see you around the traps.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.